We have Vival Levada that says, hey! We're live right now?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god. Let's see.
Hello.
We see waiting for Gaby Possible.
I want to take off that volume there.
Where?
On your computer.
Oh, yes.
Pick up to the mic.
Oh,
But here
okay.
it is.
Okay. Yay! There we are. Cool.
Hello.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Gabriella from Gaby Possible, and this is my lovely partner in crime, Andrew from Andy Thinks. Today, we are hosting our very first live show, and we're just going to pray that this goes well. Can everybody hear us? I feel like people can. Let's just check. If I look off to the side, it's because I have my laptop here just to check for any technical difficulties, as well as just read the comments that you guys pop up, because I don't have my glasses, so I don't know what I'm seeing. So, let's introduce ourselves. Okay, so everybody knows who I am, but Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and just a quick statement?
Well, I'm Andy of the very small and yet uncovered YouTube channel Andy Thinks, and I think about stuff and I strategize about stuff, and I do all manner of thinking and exploring ideas, and so that's just a little bit about what I do.
Can you give me an example of some of the streams or shows that you've done in the past?
Well, I generally focus on subjects like religion and philosophy, aesthetics, like and music and art. And my primary focus right now is in psychology, dreams, and religion.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's beautiful. And I shouldn't speak like I don't know that, because I feel like I do. Okay, well, thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me use your room. Thank you for letting me use your webcam. And thanks for just being a great person in general. So before we get started, I just wanted to talk about the intention that Andrew and I have for this stream, because I realized that the topic of on men is pretty huge, and I just want to say that with this stream, I don't think that Andrew and I are attempting to put a band-aid on the issues that the world has today. I'm not a political channel, and I'm not trying to be. But what I'm hoping, because so many of my male subscribers responded very emotionally to my previous video about the shadow, is that maybe in this conversation with Andrew, you'll hear something that interests you or makes you think a little bit more, or inspires you to speak to somebody that maybe you have differing opinions with, because Andrew and I debate all the time, and we have differing opinions about a couple of things, but we always manage to meet in the middle a lot of the time. And so I'm really just hoping for a small domino effect. And if you hear something today that you feel is interesting and take it into another conversation that sparks small positive change, then that's good for me. So with that being said, since this is still a very large topic, do you have any fears about addressing a topic like this, about addressing masculinity, about addressing men, especially to the internet in today's social climate?
Oh, I think my primary fear about it is not so much what I'll say or what I'll explore. It's more how it might be perceived, and it's because it seems like today a lot of what we say gets kind of dragged out of what it's meant to do. And so I think my fear is that I don't tread carefully enough, but that is an issue in itself, for me at least. And so I think today, if we just remain honest and talk about things in a way that's with the intention of just exploration and trying to find whatever little nugget of truth decides to show up and make its light appear, then that's what we should be going for. And I think as long as we have that in mind, we don't have much to worry about.
Okay.
But yeah.
I like that. I have a couple of similar fears. One of my biggest fears is the fact that when I posted this idea to my Facebook page, with the types of wonderful, amazing people that I've known throughout my life, I fear that I'm going to be seen as a little bit more extremist leaning than I actually am. I'm a pretty neutral person when it comes to being either left or right. I'm pretty liberal, but the subject of men and masculinity today is hot button. And I'm afraid of being seen as alt-right or alt-right adjacent, or, you know, something that I'm not. And thank you. And it's amazing because all we're talking about is dudes. It's not anything evil to talk about, yet I feel like I will be perceived as someone who is just part of the problem because I'm attempting to even have this discussion. But with that being said, we're still here and we're going to have the discussion anyway. So I would like to start this discussion with questions about your personal story and personal perspective on your own manhood, your own masculinity, and your own life. With that being said, question number 1 from my book is, what in your upbringing shaped your perception of what it means to be a man?
Well, depends. Because I think what slowly became a definition of being a man was really just a collection of experiences that would put me more in line with the group I was with, as opposed, not so much so my
Is it loud enough? I hear people saying louder.
Okay, we can turn it. We got it louder.
Okay.
Okay, well, if it's gonna come down to the idea that, okay, what am I upbringing? Well, it was a lot, and I would say probably primarily in high school is when I started to create a definition of who I was, and maybe I wasn't very accurate, but it relied so much more on what would make me synchronized with the social group I was with, and so my guy friends all do this, then I do that, and we're violent because that's what we do, or we're angry because we're angry, and it was more about falling in line with the group as opposed to striking out on my own and figuring out who I was on my own. And so a lot of what initially shaped what I considered to be a man was what I thought everyone else thought. And as I got older, I realized that nobody knows, actually, and that everyone's trying to figure out their own definition of who they are as a man, or is whatever they're trying to characterize in themselves. So my definition of manhood always kind of the posts shifted a lot, but it generally was what's going to maintain the relationship I have with the social circle I have right now, and what would the behaviors that would get me more points, or in what behaviors got me less points, And
Can you expand on what behaviors got you more points and what got you less?
Well, more points would be things like overt aggression. Points would be loyalty, and so I think it was really important for a lot of us to know that we had each other's back. And because I grew up in the metal and the hardcore metal and punk scene, and so there was a lot of violence, there was a lot of drugs, and so a lot of the guys, a sense of having loyalty was extremely important to everybody, because we all felt like we were in a place that was dangerous, and so if you didn't have that support, then you were at threat of getting hurt. And so it was a big deal for all of us to have each other's back, and part of having each other's back, quote unquote, means overt aggression, suspension of critical thinking in the defense of your brother. And so if my friend does something stupid and somebody wants to hurt him, I don't let that person hurt him, even though I know that might be okay, And so there's a lot of those little situations that popped up where it's like you suspend your moral compass because you have a principle for the brotherhood or for your fellow men, as a group, because we bound together so tightly, and that bond was solidified by struggle and perceived or created or inflicted. So what defined us defined me as a man was what I could do for the group, for more often than not.
What were some of the best things you found yourself doing for the group?
Well, the best thing I think that anyone did for the group was just if you were there, that was enough. And so being there and being that support and answering the phone anytime somebody called, you know, or just going and hanging out whenever, even if you didn't want to, it didn't matter. It's that this is your friend, this is your homie, this is your brother, and you are loyal to him, so you follow the stricture, and so that's just what you do.
I think the beautiful part about that is that it's not very different from what girls in their own sisterhoods do. All that we do as women when we're trying to support each other is everything that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So that's something to take from that. And I feel like a lot of people are here, and that's good.
That is good. Yeah, no, there's definitely people in the chat.
There's definitely people in the chat. Hi, everybody.
That's really good. I'm glad that everyone's here.
Okay. Well, jumping off from that point now that we're talking about support, my second question to you was, how do you personally support other men today as well as your female counterparts in today's social climate?
Well, I think the biggest part of that question that immediately jumps to mind is that to more effectively support my fellow men and women, I leave behind the idea that there's any dichotomy between the two. And so I treat you as I treat any of my guy friends, and my guy friends get all the same privileges as any other female friend when it comes to me. So an open ear, or a shoulder to lean on, or just someone to hang out with, or someone to make music with, or someone to think and share mull over ideas with. All of those things I offer to either side, and those things I think are necessary to share in a equal way with both sides. And I think if there was a special treatment you're giving to one side over the other, it would indicate to me an issue somewhere in my perception of either side, you know. And so I you know, there's that rule. It's like bros before girls. Right? So, and, you know, we all know.
Yeah.
We all know how you're supposed to say it, but you know, it's a family show. And that rule, I think, is nonsense, and I always had. And even when I was younger and more devoted to my perceived identity, that rule didn't make any sense to me, because it didn't feel like that I'm treating anybody equally. I wouldn't give my friend Garrett any more special privilege than my friend Ashley, you know, and that's just, you know, because they're not any different. And I think that rule, like that one, which is just a cultural norm, and it's almost like it's second nature for guys to believe that and understand it, because there's some, like, I don't know, there's some weird nugget of something in there. I don't understand it, but
knowing you, and knowing myself, and knowing the way that we interact, you're very on point when you say that, like, you definitely treat me with the same respect that you treat anybody, and I've seen you with different types of people. However, I do think that there are specifics in the way that we treat, I don't want to just say females versus males, because that's a little bit too broad, but we know what one person might respond to better that another person might not respond to as well. So, for example, a long time ago, I think you and I were having a discussion about the way that I personally relate to men in my conversation more than I do women sometimes. And a lot of the times it's because I love to shit on people and tease them and joke with them. And I find that when I do that with my female friends, I have to be a little bit more picky about who I'm doing that with versus my male friends who just respond to that very well. And so that, for me, pointing that out is a specific difference in communication styles. Do you find that there's anything specific that you might do with one sex versus the other? And you can focus on, like, the positives that you might do.
Well, I think that what you just stated is a big one, actually, because it plays towards a ton of our interactions together as the two sexes, right? And so, yeah, I do joke around with my male buddies differently than I would joke around with my lady buddies, because it's not necessarily because one's a man and one's a woman. It's more of a temperamental difference. You know, I'm not talking to their biology. I'm talking to their temperament.
Yep.
And so I know the and there's a reason why, and the stereotype, you guys are the gentler sex, because you are, and men are so much more aggressive just innately.
On average,
yeah, and you know, I mean, like I believe that truth is conveyed physically. I mean, if you look at our bodies and what they're meant to, what they're made to do historically, what they've done, you know, like we're expressions of that biological aggression, and that would play out in in the way we socialize as well. And so what you see like in men is that flirtatious combat, is verbal or physical otherwise. Guys like to wrestle, guys like to play bloody knuckles, they like to hit each other, you know, they smack each other, all that stuff, and they beat each other up verbally. That might be taken as legitimate aggression from a female, right? And I've observed the same thing. It's a very rare woman that I can speak to on that almost purely male style communication, right? Because what I can say to my friend Sean right off the bat is different than what I can say to my coworker Taylor,
right?
And that's completely different,
based on temperament.
Yeah, exactly, and it's based on their temperament, right? Because I understand Sean and I understand these two people as different people. It's not like, well, Taylor's a girl and I got to treat her like she's a girl, and it's like, no, I just know Taylor. And so I think the key to interpersonal relationships is understanding the individual and not judging them based on the box that you're putting them in originally.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And so, well, I mean, and that's the point of equality, and is that when I'm talking to a female, it's the same spark of life is in them that is in any other. It doesn't matter how they're embodied. You know, the embodiment of the spirit or the intellect that occupies them is not explicitly derived from the biology, right? And so, and I think that there's a sanctity around a person, and by person I mean the self, the being that carries through over time, and that person's almost sexless. Like the person you are throughout time is sexless. Your body is engendered because it has to be, because you're a conduit of reality. And I don't want to get too spacey.
No, I love it. Yeah. These are great answers. He's my boyfriend, right?
Yeah, truth's out.
Well, that's a beautiful answer, and I love that you don't communicate with people based on the boxes that we are told to put people in. And so based on, by the way, I just want to say hi everybody who's in the chat right now. Hello Dom Dom, hi Vival, hi Clementine, hi Madison, hi Tata, hi Luke and Honda and everybody who's here. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you guys. And based off of the question and the discussion that we were having about what shaped your definition of manhood when you were growing up, I'd like to ask now that you are 27 years old and you've been around the block a couple of times and you've learned so much over the course of your 27 years, has your definition of manhood changed? And do you even think that there is a defining term that defines masculinity, or do you think that it's more personal, person to person? Because I certainly feel that way with femininity. But if that's too broad a question, then how has your definition of masculinity changed now that you are 27?
Well, I think that it's hard to put a definition on that. I mean, there is a technical definition, and I guess it depends on what level you're looking at, because there is a technical biological definition that's rooted very heavily, and it does have a part in the way our temperament is built. And so you can't ignore that there are differences on the extreme ends between the two sexes. And so without ignoring that, my definition of masculinity, it hasn't shifted so much as it hasn't changed drastically, but it's been focused. And I think that's the journey that every man goes through, is that as you become an individual and as you realize your strength in the world, because I think that if there's one key definition to masculinity, it's strength. Because and I think that word encapsulates a lot of what masculinity has to offer, the dynamic pairing of male and female.
Can you expand on the definition of strength? Because I know that maybe some of my female viewers would be hearing that word and thinking, well, I'm strong too, emotionally, mentally.
Well, no, correct. And strength is key to both, but it's almost, maybe strength isn't the greatest word. I'm kind of thinking on my feet.
That's okay.
I think what it is to be a man, or of masculinity, is strength and provision.
Okay.
And so your ability, look, okay, this is a complicated one. There's a big thought coming through.
That's okay. Take your time. I'm checking the comments.
Here's okay, so here's my definition of masculinity now, is that you've got to have a big stick, so to speak, and you've got to know how to use it. But masculinity is, at least from a moral standpoint, is the understanding of knowing when to use that stick and when not to. And when you realize that 99.9% of the time you don't need the stick at all.
Okay.
Because that stick you've got, which is your biological hardware, right? And so I'm giant and I'm really strong physically. I can use that for all kinds of stuff. And there's guys that do, right? And it's the responsibility is on every male
to know when to pull back and pull forward.
To know when to use that force that they have, that strength. And I mean that strength because the strength is different than a female strength. Female strength is in different directions, and the male strength is in a different direction. And so, I can pick up really heavy boxes, giant boxes. I'm not saying there aren't buff women out there that can pick up more than I can, but the biggest guy in the world can pick up more than the biggest lady in the world. So all I'm saying is we can pick up boxes, and that translates downwards and upwards. And so, yeah, I think that masculinity is just about provision and strength, and knowing when to use the force that you've been granted, because you've been granted a certain set of strengths, and knowing when to use those effectively and as little as possible is what makes you a good, at least masculine in a good sense. Because there's a and
as little as possible.
Well, because my personal philosophy towards force is that you use as little as possible.
Okay.
And at the last second, essentially, like
okay.
you never want to use more than you need, and so what you do is you use as little as you can to get past what you need, because then you won't overexert yourself. You don't threaten any real damage to you or whatever you're negotiating with, and so using a little bit of mental force is necessary to get through the world. And I think that's its own issue. I think the issue for men is that force is not reined, and so it's out of control, and a lot of young men especially. And so it's learning and seeing what it means to use that for good, that virility, that passion, that ferocity, right? The warrior blood that runs through all of us, the one that carries you out into the field to go slaughter an animal and bring it back to your tribe to feed your family. That energy, if it's not poured into something smart, will start manifesting in ways that are dark and that nobody wants, and it's not good for the individual, and it's not good for society. So yeah, I think that's at least.
For thinking on your feet, I think that was a fantastic answer. Even if you weren't thinking on your feet, I think that's a fantastic answer. For any of the viewers watching right now, male or female, I would like to ask the male viewers what their personal definition of their own masculinity is. Like, what has made you feel like you are a man instead of a boy? And for my female viewers, and for anyone else, what to you defines a man? And that's not necessarily to say that, like, for example, as a woman, I don't think I have the right to define a man personally. I can maybe comment on it, but I don't think I have the right to influence that definition so much. But I'd still like to hear your opinion. And Maddie from Art Studio for Kids, I miss you too, and I miss everybody there as well. With that being said, I actually asked a couple of my male friends on Facebook what their own personal definition of masculinity is, and I got a lot of really varied answers, and I'd like to read some of them to you because I think I'd just like to give them a voice. So names have been changed for anonymity's sake, but for example, Jared's definition of what defines him as a man is, he says, figure out what you want, make it known. Others may object, and it's good to listen to them, but you can disagree and maintain your vision without hurting them. I also think it's going to be better and better the more we realize we're all just humans with different positions and perspectives, and a man really shouldn't be that different from a woman. And so I thought that was a pretty decent answer. My friend Jose says, generally speaking, I spend my time with white-collar men, and the expectations they usually understand are being held to them on average are to make a lot of money, to tease other people, to feel like they're always ahead of the pack with everything that they are normally done. Since they're upper earners, they aren't held to masculine standards typical of lower and middle class men, like getting in fights, drinking a lot, etc. For the most part, they're expected to have money and put on a show. Otherwise, they aren't really held to much standards by their men. They only really have to act like a man in the arena of competition for a woman's affection or in the dating sense. And I thought that this was the most interesting point from that friend, when he said, really, when there are no women present and when there's nobody else to date, acting like a man doesn't really mean anything because you're no longer really comparing yourself to anyone on a masculine basis. And so I really enjoyed that. I thought that it was an interesting commentary that behind closed doors, all you really are is yourself. The definition masculine versus feminine and what makes a man versus what makes a woman kind of disappears because at the end of the day, we're all in our underwear. We're all watching terrible shows and eating way too many things that aren't good for us. So I would like to ask you now, who are some of your favorite male role models and why?
Man, that's a hard question because I had a lot of them, and it seems like they're not role models explicitly because they're male, I think. But if I had to pick the role models that were male,
yeah.
Growing up, there was a couple of men that stood out to me and made an impact on me as a boy and a young teenager. And there were a couple of my friends' dads, and so they were around on the periphery, you know, as active in our lives as any other of your friends' parents are. But there was a couple of them that just exuded such a confidence and a strength in that they had it handled. That there wasn't a situation anomalous enough to throw them into a panic, and that it's going to be okay. That generalized feeling in a situation of panic and fear is I think one of the greatest gifts that men have for humanity in general. Is that when shit's hitting the fan, guess who's going to show up? You know, and who's going to hold the line. I'm not saying that women don't. I'm just saying that that's something that's that feels intrinsic to our nature, is to rush to the battlefield for the sake of the women and the children, and that's part of who we are. And definitely, and I know this isn't unique to me, is the willingness to sacrifice themselves, like bodies and all, for whatever will protect the tribe. And I think that is being forsaken, and I think that. And when we lose that and it's not focused in the right direction, it comes out in bad places.
Before we get on to that subject, because I do want to expand a little bit more on that, knowing how much of a history and war buff you are, can you name some of your favorite male role models?
You're right. Well, I guess, a lot of my, the dads throughout my life, because growing up, my dad was sick a lot of the time, and so he wasn't necessarily around to be an example for me, and having those guys just being stable, and if I had to name one guy from recent times, I think You know, the list is really big, you know.
That's okay.
And because I think we're all writing on the backs of everybody else, and it would have to be, man, there's a lot. And
why don't you try with just the first one that pops into your head?
Well, there's a picture of a guy in my room. It's the only picture of a guy in my room, and it's of a doctor named Jordan B. Peterson.
Jordan Peterson?
Jordan B. Peterson. I've been fairly enamored with him for probably 2 or 3 years now, and his lecture series on personality and on meaning really blew me out of the water, and really had consolidated a lot of thoughts that I had just kind of in the cloud of thoughts that I'm constantly lost in, and he kind of put them in a straight line and then kind of knocked me out of the park with some of his beliefs. And I know he's been controversial, but I think it's just because people haven't listened to him all the way through.
Can you give me an example of one thing that he said that really stuck with you, regardless of whether it had anything to do about manhood, or whether it was just about being a good person, or whether it just helped your self-development?
You know what it was? It wasn't so much what he said, it was how he said it.
Okay.
And the biggest lesson I took from him is that your mind is an incredibly and terribly powerful thing. And I guess the biggest thing from him, and I couldn't say a quote, but it's that a lot of you don't know is going on. Most of you is in the background, and your conscious self is this little pinpoint. Like Carl Jung talks about waking consciousness as limited, and it's really defined by exception and ignorance, because a lot of your perception is exclusive. Like you see something, everything else in your field of vision loses its clarity, and you forget what it's there. Like, I mean, try to see what's behind your head and try to focus on what's in your peripheral vision. It just doesn't happen. You know, you might be focusing on your peripheral vision now, but so it was how he said it. It was that he thought about it, and you could tell he was thinking about it, and that he was honestly just trying to make his way through an idea. And he kind of gave me a model, and so a sincere role model on how to think. And it really, I felt like he boosted me to the next level intellectually. And by giving me a set of tools to help think, and I think that was supremely important to me. So he might not, I still have a lot of years to think through his ideas, but as a man, that's somebody I could see myself wanting to be like.
Okay, that's a good answer. Before we continue, I want to address some of the comments, because I know that a lot of y'all are here and I don't want to ignore you. I wanted to address Vivo Levada's comment. He or she says, I am gay and in high school, and I was wondering, why do you think men judge each other on masculinity?
He said you're in high school?
Yeah.
Look, when men are young, they have a lot of energy, and a lot of that energy isn't being channeled into anything productive. I can't speak for everybody, but a lot of young men go from school, which is a lot of sitting down, to lunch, which is a lot of sitting down, back to class, which is a lot of sitting down. You have a maybe 45-minute period of physical exercise, and you're right back to sitting down, and guess what we do when we get home? We sit down and play video games. And we have a lot of energy that we need to get out. And if you're not working out, or you're not focused on a hobby, or you're not growing your mind, or you're not focused and putting that passion and energy somewhere, it starts to manifest in places and in ways that aren't good. I think men target other men on masculinity primarily because they're so worried about their own. That's, it's, you poke fun at people over the things that you wish you had. And so if you've got a guy making fun of you, and I could see how being gay in high school and seeing these guys beat each other up over masculinity might be real scary. And what you have to try to understand is that their lack and their searching for their own is causing them so much anxiety that they feel like and you know, if you ask them to remember what they said last week about you or that other guy's masculinity, they wouldn't be able to tell you, because they're not really acting consciously. They're acting out of a place of anxiety and fear. And so it's not to excuse their behavior.
Right.
Their behavior is incorrect, and if it's causing you pain, that's not the way you need to get away from that, right? Your primary goal should be safety. Keep yourself safe, and emotional pain is real pain. So if you're taking abuse from your fellow classmates, move along, you know, try to get away from those guys. But I think generally why guys do that, because they're ashamed of their own, and they're desperately searching for their own masculinity, their own sense of self, and especially in high school, because in high school, I think consciously we've barely come online in high school. You're barely starting to remember what life is, you know, like you're just now getting to a point where life is starting to pick up, and you're starting to figure out who you are. And 18 through 20 to 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, it's almost like you go through life college and you start to figure out who you are. And a lot of guys at the beginning of those stages, since they can't figure it out, are going to take it out on everybody else. You talk to those guys again in 15 years, I'm sure most of them will have mellowed out and would apologize for anything that they said, because I was one of those guys that beat other guys up for their masculinity. And not really explicitly all the time. I wasn't really a nasty bully, but maybe in my head I had these terrible thoughts. And a lot of that time it was just because I was trying to defend myself from my own anxiety about my lack.
I think it's interesting that people are trying to defend their masculinity at all. I'm trying to relate to it in terms of defending my femininity and trying to think about it from my own shoes growing up. And I don't even know if there was an overt expression of trying to defend my femininity growing up. I think that it was a different type of play. I think that maybe just by trying to look as best as a stereotypically beautiful female, maybe that was me trying to defend it, and maybe other girls trying to defend it as well. Like, instead of punching each other or instead of teasing each other, maybe it was just a little bit more underhanded. And that could be why it's hard for me to pick up. But to address some of the other comments that we're getting, Shiver Fox says, Fievel, I'm not stereotypically masculine either, but your masculinity can come in other places. You're brave enough to put it out there that you're gay, which can be considered as masculinity. Absolutely, and I think that's a really beautiful comment, Shiver Fox. And yeah, I don't think your sexual orientation should define whether or not you are what you are. Like, I think that that's part of the problem with all of these boxes we're currently putting ourselves in. Is like, the best parts of the responses that I got on what it means to be a dude is that a lot of my dude friends said it really should not be very different from what it means to be a woman. And I know that on the extreme end, we all definitely have our differences biologically and temperamentally, of course, but when I hear the definitions of what it means to be a man, for example, strong, provider, forceful, passionate, I look at myself in the mirror and I think, well, am I not all of those things? And can I not be all of those things? Of course I can. And so the same goes for your sexual orientation. Whether you're gay, straight, transgender, cis, non-binary, it shouldn't take away from the fact that if you believe you are something, nobody can take that away from you. And so, you're a dude. If you want to be a dude, you're a dude. If you want to be a dude, go ahead.
I think that's what's most unfortunate about what's changing now, is that we're very much involved with what identity we are. And the question earlier about men teasing other men about masculinity was prefaced by, well, I'm this identity and this identity, and I'm also this age. So you gave yourself 3 identities, and what I think the true meaning of equality is breaking those divisions apart. You're not a 17-year-old gay high schooler. You're, what was his name?
Vival.
Vival.
You're Vival.
You're Vival.
You're a Vival.
You're a human. You're a man.
You are Vival. You are Dominic. You are a Shiver Fox. You are everybody that's watching.
Right. Yeah, and we're all so much more the same than we are different, and it's absolutely necessary that both female and male are in unison. And there's a lot of ideas, and there's a lot of people who believe that if you believe in a spirit, that every human spirit is divided between the masculine and the feminine, and that there's two sides to every person, and a lot of the manifestations of toxic masculinity are overcompensations for a feminine soul. And so what you're seeing in a lot of guys that are over tough and big trucks and stuff, I bet you in their rooms at night they're crying.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of really, it's like the biggest and loudest rooster is really the weakest. And so what we need to do is break down these barriers, stop saying things like, as men, and it's like, I understand that there are differences, and we can maintain those and explore those, and it's good to explore those distinctions, right? But maintaining an attitude of inclusivity and equality would look more like talking to each other as one, as humanity, not as a humanist approach. It's not boundaried by the sex of the individual. Your experience and my experience are more the same than they are different, and that makes sense to me.
I think that, to bounce off of that, I think that a lot of people would disagree with the experience part. I agree to a point that our experiences are more the same than they are different, and I wonder if that's more psychological and emotional than it is in the day-to-day interactions that we have with people.
I definitely mean that from a psychological standpoint. The way you perceive reality and the way you feel about things.
Yeah,
is the
that
same
I can agree with.
It's the same systems that I feel. When you're angry, I feel the same way when I'm angry. When you're sad, I feel sad too.
Yeah.
We feel the same way. We go through life in the same manner. Our experience, the things that we experience are different.
Yeah.
And how we process them
there we go. Yeah.
is the same.
Yes. Okay. Good. Okay, so to expand on that, what you said about the men crying in their rooms at night, no matter how loud and tough they are outside, I did ask one of my friends what they wish other people would know about quote-unquote real men, or just men in general. And all he could really say was, real men cry. And that leads me to ask, like, are you okay? How much are you crying? Why is that the only thing you said? But I'd like to go on to another point when you started talking about the ways that we can support each other. Knowing that there are still a lot of things that we need to fix in our society, not only to grow as a man into your best self, but also as a woman for my best self. I mean, you know that I've cried to you in the car when I felt that something really stupid and just dumb was said to me based on my sexuality. You know how much it just bothers me. So knowing those things, how do you think men can better support women? And then on the flip side, how do you think women can better support men on their journey to becoming their best selves? So the first one being men and women.
Well, I think what men can do to better support women is to, and I think the deeper meaning behind real men cry is that real men understand their emotions. And have a language for them, and that's something I see a lot of men do not have, is a vocabulary for their emotion, and differentiating between your different emotions, because there's a difference between happy and ecstatic, and there's a difference between joy and glee, and there's a difference between sad and depressed, or sad and miserable, or and there's varying degrees of emotion. There's anger and rage. I'm mad, I'm upset, I'm disappointed. These are all different words we can use to explain our emotions. Most men have, I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm happy. And so as they act out their emotion, it's almost like if you only have 3 words for color, all of your paintings would only have 3 colors, right? And it wouldn't be until you learn that you can mix them that all the other colors show up, and you can portray a deeper picture. And I think since that's missing in men, it's generally what we need to interact more smoothly with women. And because I see what men do is more bullheaded, go straight in and try to fix the problem. But more often than not, the issue is more nuanced and emotional when it comes to intersexual dynamic. And so when a male comes into a situation with a female, he needs to understand that the fragility of emotion. And because and it's not their fragility of their emotion, the fragility of emotion itself in them. Because if they can't see the fragility of their own, they're not going to see the fragility in others. And so it's not that women are more emotionally fragile; it's that men are less aware of their own fragility, and in that ignorance, treat emotions kind of clumsily and can make things worse.
Okay.
And so you see that a lot, and you hear that a lot in men trying to figure out what they can do for their girlfriend. And they're offering solution after solution after solution, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And it's because they're not listening, and they don't have that emotional vocabulary to see what their partner's going through. And this would make sense for men to men too.
Yeah.
I think because that's the biggest issue between the support between the two sexes. And I think for women to men, it would be to understand the for as much as we're trying to stay away from the biological differences, the biological differences from male to female are there, and for men it really does give you a bunch of behaviors that aren't entirely in your control.
Okay.
And they are. You've got free choice to do what you want.
Yeah.
But it's a pervasive and ever-present element of your psyche.
That you're constantly working on.
Daily, minute by minute.
Especially with the years of conditioning that you are one thing when in reality now people are growing into also be that thing. Exactly.
And so there are some things that men have been told that they have to do. And there's things that men do naturally because they're male in a biological sense. And they need, I think, women to understand and to have some mercy, I guess, grace with them, and to understand them for like the monkey men we are. Like that's essentially it. Is that we're just big apes, and we're better at breaking things than we are at like picking up a small kitten or nursing a small thing to health. We're much better at building a house, which means I'm going to go break down a bunch of trees and pick up a bunch of heavy rocks and stack them on top of each other. It's not as nuanced as interpersonal dynamics, which a lot of guys are blind with. It seems like they just do not know how to handle themselves in a deep and emotional conversation. And so a better emotional compass would help male to female and female to male. And so I think understanding each of those would make things better.
Thank you. As we're reaching the last 10 minutes of our show, I believe we have 13 minutes now. I would like to open up the floor to all of the beautiful people that are watching right now. If you have any questions for either me or Andrew, hopefully related to the subject that we're talking about, but it doesn't necessarily have to be if you have another question, please ask, and Andrew and I will answer during the last 5 minutes of the show. For right now, while you're asking those questions, I would like to ask Andrew, is there anything you would like to hear from me? Because I know that even though you and I obviously have very intimate conversations since we are together, perhaps there's something that a male could hear out there, or anybody could hear out there from my perspective that hasn't really been asked. Just as an example of somebody who's a little bit more neutral, or somebody who's...
Well,
is there something you'd like to ask me?
From a male experience, and since we're going to put it in the context that we're in a relationship together, the human dating game, ultimately, women select. And so men are constantly trying to provide what would get them your grace, right? Your favor, right? And so I know you said earlier you don't think you have the right to define masculinity, but I think what men need to hear from women is, what is it that makes a man a good man? And because it seems like all we hear now is what makes a bad one. And there's plenty of guys that aren't the bad ones, and they're left without any idea what that might look like because we're so busy talking about the awful side of everything. And I think to balance things out, I think women should step up and say, this is what we appreciate in men. This is what we enjoy. This is what we find the most beautiful about men, and we can use that word with men, you know, like, so I would say you do have the right. Talk about masculinity and what you find most powerful or most necessary about it.
Okay. Well, okay. So, it's hard to explain from my perspective what I think a good man is, just because I think whatever makes a good man could also be what makes a good woman or could make a good person, just as so many of my friends feel. Especially because all of this is so individual. However, if I had to put it into broad terms, because that's just what we do as a society, my best friend said that what she considers to be a good man is somebody who considers everything around them, considers the living things that their actions are affecting. And I thought that was an interesting point. For me, a good man is completely based on my experience and what I need personally in order to feel happy and supported and safe. So those things for me are things like, does this person stand up for things just as big as him and things that other people perceive to be smaller than him? Does this person try to keep others safe with the strength that he does have? Is his definition of masculinity very rigid, or does he find ways around the stereotypes to still be everything that he considers a good man, regardless of whether or not he has the provisions to do so? For example, one of the stereotypes that men put on themselves, or that media puts on you, is that men need to provide. And I know that this affects a lot of men with their girlfriends because, for example, if a man does not have enough money to buy a present for a birthday, for Valentine's Day, for Christmas, whatever, they just won't show up with anything. And then I also know how much the girl would probably think to herself, like, I would have been fine with just a card or like a handmade thing. I remember once actually that one of my friends from another job didn't have money to buy his girlfriend an anniversary present. And so I gave him the idea to trace his hand on a piece of paper like a hand turkey. And then he just wrote everything that he loved about her on the inside of it. And she knew his situation. And so she loved the present regardless. And it's hanging on her wall today. And so, like, I think to me, a good man is not only all of the things that I mentioned, but someone who takes all of the stereotypes that he has been given by the media, by conditioning, by everything, and chooses ways that he can expand on them so that he is proud of himself, so that he is proud of his actions, so that he helps other people feel safe, and so that he is just this glorious beam of light that not only provides in the best ways that he knows how, but helps others to provide as much as he does. So that's broadly my definition.
I think maybe to extend on that, a symbolic side of that is almost like the male spirit is the castle, and it's the walls that defend, and it provides the shelter so that the life can grow, and it's almost like they're the stalwart defender of life, and so women bring it in.
Even if it's just their own male friends that they're defending.
Exactly, and it seems like it's hardwired into us to be those defenders. And when someone's in danger, a good man rises to the occasion. And I don't think that's a society-driven thing. I think that's driven biologically, and I think that's made sense for us on an evolutionary standpoint. And so I think that is embodied in us, and I don't think that's something to be forsaken. I think it's something to be refocused, right? Because in a society where we're not plagued by giant predators, giant cats, and we don't have to protect the tribe from swooping cranes and all that stuff, it needs to be refocused in a different direction. And that constructor of defenses and that stalwart warrior spirit needs to go in a certain direction. We haven't figured out where that's going to go in the future, because we're just trying to figure out what it is in the first place. But I think that symbolically that's what men are. And it's almost like men are the stone walls around the garden, and the garden's the feminine, from a symbolic standpoint. That's what it seems like to me.
Okay. For the last, oh goodness, 6 minutes of the show left. Okay. I'd like to address some of the questions that you guys have asked. And so let's see what questions we have here in the comments. Let's see. This may not be relevant, but bullying about sexuality has changed from outright insults to maybe you're just faking it because they can't. Okay. So this isn't a question, but Vival says, this may not be relevant, but bullying about sexuality has changed from outright insults to maybe you're just faking it because they can't relate. Oh, Vival, I can't say that I relate on a personal level to what you're going through because I obviously am not going through what you're going through. But what I do understand is being told that I don't know the things that I'm doing, even though I'm the one doing them. Being told that my intentions for doing something are something other than what I'm doing them for. For example, like if I'm wearing a skirt or if I'm wearing lipstick to work. I have had people, unfortunately, that are just like, well, you're wearing that because you want to get a mate. And I'm like, no, I'm wearing that because I want to, and it's for me. Or, you want to help people because of some sinister reason that's way more Freudian than I'd like to discuss right now. And then they try to shape those reasons based off of their own experiences. And then I know what it feels like to constantly have to defend why you do the things that you do and explain to people, hey, I'm glad that you have your opinion, but you're not in my body, you're not in my mind. And so I need you to trust that what it is that I'm saying about myself is real because it's coming from me and you're not in me. So I'm sorry that you're going through so much. And I know that I can't relate on a personal level, but I hope that whatever we've been saying has brought you a hint of comfort. And thanks for being here. And so let's see who else.
I think Shiver Fox had a good question.
Yes. As a trans man, am I doing myself a disservice by doing art and focusing more on the creative side of me rather than doing sports? No. I don't think you could ever do a disservice to yourself by doing what you are passionate about. It doesn't matter whether you are a man or a female or anybody in the rainbow of colors that is humanity today. I don't understand why anyone would ever dare pressure you to do something that you might not have the passion of doing. What do you think?
Well, I understand that drive. In high school, I felt the same way. I was the nerdy, wore all black, grew my hair out long, drew and wrote music. And so I was definitely more on the art side of things, and I had no real interest in playing sports. Mm-hmm. Even though I was asked why I wouldn't. I mean, I had the body for a football player, and a lot of the guys that went and tried out were like, I don't know why Andrew didn't come. I asked him to. It's like, oh, well, I wasn't really interested in it, and it doesn't mean anything to your masculinity what you do. It seems like masculinity is just this transient characteristic that kind of shifts, and that kind of goes into the next question. I saw one about masculinity changing over time. I don't know who asked it, but I think what Shiver Fox needs to know is that you can't rely on society's definition of masculinity. And if as a trans person, I don't think that you just don't need to worry about that. Like you can't. Like you need to let it go and focus on what you want to be defined as, and if that's art, then go for it full fledged. Mm-hmm. Like and don't forsake who you think you are and what you want to be for what you think everyone else wants you to be. And that's the point. That's the point of the entire conversation, is that male or female, you need to focus on your sense of individuality and grow it to the extent that you can. And that doesn't mean you fall for the words of some naysayers or passersby or the internet or Facebook or YouTube. You don't let them guide your decisions. You follow the voice that's inside. And that voice inside is telling you, I want to make art. You do the art. Yep. And you do it as well as any of the varsity football players do. You go to the game and you watch their practices. That's how hard you work. And if you do, you'll get where you want to go.
And to add to that, Shiver Fox, I think that as a trans man, you are already, with respect to everything that you're going through and with I respectfully say this, you are already defying tradition. You are already being brave enough to say no to the rules that the entire world has followed for as long as we've all been alive.
That's pretty damn masculine, if you ask me.
That's pretty goddamn masculine. Yeah. I would say that it's interesting that as brave as you are for even daring to change the rules, here you are questioning a rule, which is, should I be playing sports or should I be doing art? You've already proven yourself to be someone who breaks boundaries just by doing something so brave and saying, hey, I am this thing. I am authentically myself, whether you like it or not. So don't go back on that. Fuck whatever anyone else thinks about what it means to be traditionally masculine, traditionally feminine. I'm not going through what you're going through, but growing up, I had a little bit of a conflict about not my sexuality, but why I was doing things differently from other girls. I wondered if I wasn't woman enough because I sat really differently. That's one thing. I used to sit with my legs really far open apart with my elbows on my knees, traditionally the way that a guy leans in for a conversation. And I also used to never wear dresses or skirts, and I was incredibly blunt and still am and crass, and my parents even questioned my sexuality a couple of times, and I've grown into defining myself as what it means to be a female. And I'm sure that Andrew can relate that he has grown into what he defines personally as what being a man is to him. So I invite you to do the same, because you've already done it. You have already declared yourself as such. So if you are a man that makes art and doesn't do sports, good for you. And be that to the brightest and best. You deserve it. You're alive. And so,
and hey, if you get any crap from the jocks, because they wish they had your talent, and they have to work out every day to get somewhere. You can sit down and use your hand for a couple hours and create something that they couldn't do in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so that, it seems like a lot of what bothers you about other people could be explained by their manifesting a discontent because they wish they had what you have.
Mm-hmm.
And so you should take it on the chin and say, oh, hey, well, I guess I'm going in the right direction. If you've got people that don't want, that are envious and then you're moving in the right direction. You wouldn't be, you're not solving any problems if more problems aren't popping up.
Yeah, exactly. And so the last question that we will address, let's see, is from Vival. Again, thank you. Do you think masculinity evolves throughout generations, or does masculinity stay the same? From my perspective, I think that with male and female and all of the beautiful rainbows that we have, I think that deep down in our hardwiring, there are things that will always stay not the same, but things that will stay consistent. I think that with male and female, for example, as a female, I know what's hardwired into me based on all of the years of evolution we've had throughout this planet. But I also know that in today's day and age, I have the freedom to expand on them. And so just because I am hardwired to be a little less strong physically, ankles are different, wrists are different, my hip bones are definitely meant to incubate and birth and not necessarily to carry hundreds of pounds across a desert. Even though I might not be able to do those physical things as greatly as a man and for as long a duration of time, I know that I can still make myself physically strong. And even though I am hardwired to be a little bit more sensitive and intuitive or empathetic or any of those other things, I know that I am also in a point in time where I also have the freedom to be crass and to be loud and to be sarcastic and to interject. And so the things that are hardwired into us, I think, will remain consistent as long as humanity exists. But I also think that as we evolve, and change over time, I think there will be more examples of men being all of the traits that I listed for women, and women being any traits that I listed for men. And so we'll just have to wait and see. What do you think?
I mean, it definitely changes. Just depends on which level you want to look at it. To me, I mean, at the deepest level, the archetypal mythological level, I think, like almost the religious level, the masculine and the feminine is embodied in the Tao, or the yin and yang, the symbol of yin and yang. And so you can spend eternity thinking about the characteristics of chaos and the characteristics of order, and that they don't necessarily, they're not direct analogs for male and female humans, but the spirit of those things in unison live in each of us, and that we're in a time where it seems like the yin and the yang is trying to find its balance again, and it's a hard thing to do, but we'll hit the center at some point. And so I think that symbolically, no, the archetype of male and female stays, and it remains, and it's our fight against that and to try to wrench that archetype into a different direction is causing a bunch of problems, when we should let it go and just focus on staying in the center, which is loving everyone as if they're the other half of you, because they are, and that's the point.
It sounds like we have it sounds like we have different words, but we're kind of on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's just a different level of analysis, you know, like and technically, yeah, our ideas about masculinity have changed. In 1914, if you weren't heading off to the Western Front in World War I, women would come around and pin a white flower on your chest and call you a coward, and it was your obligation to serve the state in combat, and if you did not, you were shamed. And nowadays it's not the same. Not even 15-20 years ago, you had to, if you were gay, you stayed quiet about it, because there was guys that would get violent, literally would be violent with people that came out as homosexual. And I knew guys like that, and I'm not going to say what they said, but they would say awful things, and that was not too long ago. And so I understand there's still problems in the world, but they do change, you know, and our perceptions of masculinity change for sure, and they've changed drastically over the past 5 years, and I think too drastically, that we left some parts and fractured some ends that needed to be preserved, or at least thought about a little bit more. And so that's kind of what this conversation's about, is tying those loose ends, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I love what Dominic just said. Andrew's are bigger words, same direction. Yeah. Well, that actually, Dom, that tends to be the difference between me and Andrew, is that we are always on the same page. I think my language is just a product of where I came from. Just a very accessible place, because I just tend to, I don't know. I don't know why it is.
I'm a big giant nerd.
I'm an emotional nerd.
I read history textbooks for fun.
Yeah. That's always the fun part, is that pretty much we're always on the same page. We always just start off with different words, and then as we peel back the layers of the onion, then we finally meet in the middle, and we're like, hey, you were saying what I was saying all along. With that being said, I want to thank you, Andrew, for allowing me to pick your brain and letting me destroy your room and coming on to my first live stream ever. I hope that one day, we can do this again with, all of the professional lighting and camera and all of that stuff that you deserve, because I would love to give your thoughts, like, the actual video quality it deserves. So thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and to the beautiful 5 people watching right now, and everyone that commented, I just want to say thank you guys, for coming out. And please let me know what you liked about this stream in the comments. Please let me know if you would like me to interview anybody in the future, and also let me know how I can improve, because this is my first live stream here, and so I know that there are things that I can improve. With that being said, I love you guys so much. Gaby Gets a Life will resume on Saturday. I don't know what the date is, but it's the Saturday coming up. Okay. So thank you both so much. This has been a lot more helpful than I realized it could be. And I definitely have some good things to mull over with my therapist on Monday. Ah, that's great. Oh my God. I'm so happy you're in therapy. Yes, bitch.
Yes, that's really awesome.
With that being said, I love you guys. I will see you in my next video, and hopefully one day I will be able to bring back Andrew and do more interviews, okay? Goodbye.
All right, guys. Thank you.
How do we stop it?
Stop it.
Oh, okay, cool.
Bye.